I'm going to be all over the place tonight. So in doing this research about Ward's battery, I need to set the stage. So let's start with the spring of 1864. Abraham Lincoln needed to run, or was about to run for a second election, and he needed to have an important, significant victory. So here comes Sherman, they finished now in Chattanooga, and they're going south. And Sherman, as you know, he gets to Atlanta and starts the march to the sea. But first of all, now in Atlanta they had about 20,000 residents, and they had the 4 railroad lines, which was very significant. That's why they needed it. But the forerunner to that was, and we're gonna eventually get to Ward's battery, but as the men were starting from Chattanooga all the way down to Atlanta, at this period of time, the weather was horrendous. Of course it was hot, of course, it's the South, but they also had a lot of rain. And the rain was so bad that the men said it was like trying to walk through batter. And some of them said that even their pant legs that were tucked inside of their boots started to get moldy. And it was just the worst it could be. And one of the Union soldiers said, "The Rebs have in Mother Nature an ally which surpasses all others." And another one referred to the heat as that wretched Georgia summer. We can relate to that right now, can't we? Now, General Leonidas Polk and his men had arrived at Kennesaw Mountain. This is where my story starts. On May the 11th, 1864, to combine forces with General Joseph Johnston. On May the 12th, he baptized Lieutenant General John Bell Hood, and on May 18th, he baptized General Joseph Johnston. Let's talk a little bit about the Polk family. You know that his father had won in a bean game, Rattle and Snap Plantation up in Murray County, right? Everybody knows that? And his 4 sons had inherited large tracts of land, and where they intersected is where St. John's Church is. Has anybody been to St. John's Church? Okay. Very historic, and as you know, Patrick Claiborne, on his way to battle in Franklin, Tennessee, thank you very much. And he stopped there and he said, "I wouldn't mind dying if I could be buried in such a beautiful place." And you know, he was buried there temporarily. And it's only open one day a year, that's Whit Sunday. A few years ago, of course, they had some kids that broke in and did as much damage as they could. And you can only be buried there now in the churchyard. They have some beautiful headstones there if you are a descendant of somebody that's buried there. And I am a descendant of Reverend Robert Donnell's mother-in-law is buried there. So I could be buried there. Not for a while, I hope. The 4 plantations: Ashwood Hall, Hamilton Place, Westbrook, and Rattle and Snap. Now you know the Bishop Polk, known as the Fighting Bishop, he was one of the founders of Swanee, and he performed the wedding ceremony of Huntsville native John Hunt Morgan. And this was in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and unfortunately the happiness of the occasion of John Hunt Morgan's wedding was shattered less than 2 years later when he was killed in battle, and his wife was pregnant at the time. So Leonidas Polk was considered then and now to be a terrible tactician, and General Braxton Bragg hated him, and the feeling was mutual. Braxton Bragg called him a worthless old woman. And both of these men had gone to Jefferson Davis trying to get the other one relieved of duty. But Jefferson Davis was a good friend of Leonidas Polk. So as we know, that didn't work out anyway because of what happened next. Now, the biggest complaint about Polk was that he was too lax with his men, but his men loved him. So on June the 1st, General Polk wrote a letter to his wife. "I think I have never seen the troops, one and all, in such fine spirits and condition as they are, and am of the very common opinion that under God we shall beat them when the collision shall take place. On Sunday, June the 12th, while the rain continued to fall, he presided over a worship service with his staff and the members of the Hardage family where he was staying, who owned the home where he was staying near Kennesaw Mountain. I already said that. Now, on June the 14th, 1864, anybody know what happened that day? Good. 4 Confederate generals, along with the members of their staff, walked to the top of Pine Mountain on that morning, June the 14th, to get a better look of the area below. A short distance away was General Sherman, and he's looking with his binoculars and he sees them, and of course among the 4 is General Pope, and he's can't believe what he's looking at, and he cannot let this opportunity pass. He tells, bring those cannons up here and aim right there. A couple of cannonballs hit close by, and the other 3 generals are scrambling for safety, but not Polk. So a cannonball hits him straight through the chest and goes into the tree behind him. Now, some people think that he was in the midst of prayer when this happened. Some people say that he just had his arms crossed, but it went through both arms, went through his chest. Have any of you read Company H by Sam Watkins? Is this not the best book?
Yeah.
And this is the diary. He's talking about that very event. And he was there when they brought down the body of General Polk. And he said it was white as marble. There was no blood. Now that cannonball, when it went through and cauterized that open wound, so there was no blood coming out. However, his pockets were full of blood. And when they brought his body down, they found in his right coat pocket 4 blood-soaked copies of Balm for the Weary and Wounded, B-A-L-M, Balm. 3 of which have been inscribed to General Joseph Johnston, William Hardy, and John Bell Hood, and the 4th one had his name in it. He had planned to present those later on that same day. Now this was a really tough event for his own men because they loved him so much, and Sam Watkins said that his men felt, and everybody else, when he was around, there was a calming sense that all was well. Sam Watkins was also from Murray County, by the way. So, yeah, I've been there. Have you been to his grave? It's quite interesting. Later that same day, General Joseph Johnston wrote a short and succinct message to His Excellency Jefferson Davis. The Army and the country this morning had the calamity to lose Lieutenant General Polk, who fell by a cannon shot directed at one of our batteries. And then he wrote this message to Polk's men. Comrades, you are called to mourn your first captain, your oldest companion in arms. Lieutenant General Polk fell today at the outpost of his army, the army he raised and commanded, in all of whose trails he shared, to all of whose victories he contributed. Blah, blah, blah. But where he fell, an angry Confederate had wrote a note, and he pierced it with a ramrod. And this note said, and this is where he was shot, where he died. You damned Yankee sons of bitches have killed our old General Polk.
Apt description.
Now the day after General Polk was killed, though, my ancestor, who is from here, Colonel Daniel Hunley, was captured. And he was taken to John Logan, Union General John Logan, to his camp, to his table, to his tent. And he had a meal spread out, and he invited Daniel Hunley to sit down and eat with him. And Hunley said, no, I'm not going to do that. You took that food from people around here who are now starving because your army has wiped them out, and I'm not going to contribute to their suffering. And he was put on a train at that point. Then he was taken to Johnson's Island, outside of Sandusky, Ohio. He was eventually released in July of 1865, several months after the war had ended. But you know, the officers, they wanted to punish them especially because they, you know, he had escaped from Johnson's Island, and their goal was fight, 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 no matter where they are. Enough of Daniel Hunley. Now we're going to get to Captain John Ward. He was from Huntsville. He had been a mayor in Huntsville. His home was still standing on McClung Street. Recruited his men, a lot of them from Limestone County, by the way, from all of North Alabama in 1862. And until the summer of 1864, they served with the Army of Mississippi. At that time, they were transferred to Storrs Battalion in the Army of Tennessee, which brought them in the line of fire at Kennesaw Mountain. Confederate General Matthew Ector plays a part also in this event of Captain Ward's death, actually, was stationed at the Chattahoochee River at the railroad bridge. The Union soldiers began to fire their artillery occasionally and then continually, and then it was through several nights. But on June the 20th, Ector's brigade was moved to Pace's Ferry Road, where they formed a line of battle and began to fortify their line. Slight skirmishing began, and then it became heavier, more intense. And on the Confederates, of course, returned the gesture in kind. And from the description of the official reports, it appeared to be more of an aggravation than a serious combat, but that was about to change. Captain John Ward's battery, Alabama battery, and Captain Henry Gueber's, and I hope I said that right. Did I? Nobody knows. Gueber. Missouri battery, were ordered to take their Napoleon 12-pounders to the crest of Little Kennesaw Mountain. Now, this was a 400-foot high mountain with a steep descent. So they had to go around the back, and they had a hard time trying to get those cannons up there. And it took them a while, but it was a perfect place for them to be so that they could see all the way around them and they could better fight against the enemy. At daylight on June the 27th, Confederates aimed their volleys where smoke arose from the distant campfires that were built to cook their breakfast. They fired down the quartermaster's encampments, the ordnance, the commissary wagons, and the tents of the officers. The Battle of Kennesaw Mountain began. U.S. Corporal Charles Smith of the 16th Wisconsin described the horrors of cannon fire when he wrote a letter to his father. "The worst thing I fear is a blasting bombshell. They tear so. There was about a dozen of us that come very near being buried all up. The top of Kennesaw Mountain is lined with rebel batteries. They hurl their missiles with deadly intent." John Kendall, who was a second lieutenant in the 4th Louisiana Infantry, also described the shelling from the Confederate cannons. "About the hardest task a soldier is called upon to endure is to take a shelling. The summit of the mountain was the focal point of countless missiles, shrieking, yelling, howling, hissing, gobbling, or sharply cracking. The shells were like a swarm of unseen fiends, whilst the smoke of their explosions, the villainous smell they let loose, and the heavy curtain-like vapor floating slowly up from below made a hot and sulfurous atmosphere highly suggestive of the place where His Satanic Majesty is reputed to reside." Kind of gives you a feeling of what's going on that day, doesn't it? But Sam Watkins wrote about that same battle, Kennesaw Mountain. "I've heard men say that if they ever killed a Yankee, they were not aware of it. I am satisfied that on this memorable day, every man in our regiment killed from 20 to 100 each. All that was necessary was to load and shoot. Afterward, I heard a soldier say he thought hell had broke loose in Georgia, sure enough. One soldier wrote that the Union soldiers seemed to walk up and take death as coolly as they were automatic or wooden men." Can you imagine? The Union lost 3,000 men that day. The Confederates lost 1,000 men. It was considered a small victory for the Confederates, but that wasn't good enough for Jefferson Davis. And he wanted Joseph Johnston to push harder, faster, stronger. And so he relieved him of duty and he replaced him with John Bell Hood. So, though the Union Army vastly outnumbered the Southerners, Davis was angered, and when Johnston gave up incremental pieces of the Southern territory to keep from being surrounded. So he was says that, okay, Davis was increasingly desperate for a significant Southern victory. And that's when he was replaced, and a lot of people were very unhappy, not only the army, but the civilians as well. And in the diary that my ancestor wrote while he was at Johnson's Island, he also voiced his displeasure over that. John Bell Hood had lost a leg at Chickamauga and the loss of an arm at Gettysburg, and his men called him Old Wooden Head, even though he was only 33 years old. Over the next few weeks, the skirmishing continued with General Matthew Ector's brigade and Captain John Ward's artillery fighting above the mouth of Peachtree Creek. Now they're coming farther and farther south. The skirmish lines changed as reinforcements and replacements came and went. On July 22nd, the brigade had nearly completed entrenchments, and the main line had 2 rows of fortifications. On the morning of the 27th, the Union Army opened fire on Captain Ward's battery, located on the western side of Confederate fortifications. Confederates answered with their own artillery fire. Now, I'm going to tell you an incredible story. Fast forward. You know that Robert and I are partners in the Huntsville Ghost Swap, right? We talk about ghosts. We have our other partner is a medium who sees ghosts, communicates with them. A couple of years ago, we went to the home of Captain John Ward on McClung Street. We didn't tell our medium anything about who this was, any of the backstory. So he put his hands on the wall outside the house, and he was silent for a few minutes, and then he turned to me and he said, "You have tricked me." Yes, I have. John Ward is represented in the Maple Hill Cemetery stroll, even though he's not really buried there. And the person who has portrayed him for several years is the medium. And he said he's inside the house with the ghost of John Ward, and he's looking in a mirror, and he expects to see John Ward, but instead he sees himself dressed as John Ward. John Ward knows that he portrays him in the cemetery stroll, and he says, "That gun you're carrying is all wrong. It's not going to ever shoot anybody. And that sword you're carrying is wrong too, but you do me justice." He tells us that the ghost of John Ward is dressed in civilian clothing. And the ghost of John Ward tells us what happened next at the battle. And I was able to verify this through the official records. He was sitting on his horse next to General Matthew Ector, and their cannons are behind him. They've got the berms in front of them, and the Union soldiers are coming at him. They're coming closer and closer. Now the cannons that they've got are old, and his ghost tells us this. They're old, and if they get overheated, they're going to explode or they're going to crack, and it's hot anyway without all this happening. And he says they're coming closer. They're coming closer, and we're trying to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to retreat? Are we going to keep fighting? What? There's a cannonball that's coming towards them, and they think that it's going to go past them, but instead it's directly overhead and it exploded. His ghost tells us he was thrown from his horse and he landed on his feet, but when he looked down at the ground, there was his body. Now General Ector was also wounded with shrapnel, and eventually he had to have one of his legs removed from the mid-thigh, and so he was out. But he survived the war and went on. Now John Ward also tells us that he was buried in a grave that has somebody else's name on it. There wasn't much to identify him after that happened. He had on, of course, his Confederate officer's coat, but he says that a soldier from Delaware took it off of his body as a souvenir. So somebody else is buried in his grave. And this is outside of Atlanta. So now, yes, sir.
Where is the house on McClung located?
Are you familiar with Huntsville?
Yeah.
If you're coming from Adams Street downtown, going over McClung, about halfway down, there's a red brick, on the right-hand side, with a red brick wall that goes around it. That's John Ward's house.
Okay.
Okay, so that house also, it has a gargoyle
Yeah.
water spout.
Up on,
I
you
know
have
it.
to be close by
Yeah,
to see
and it has like a one room at the very top, and it was struck by lightning in the 1970s, and the roof burned, and it was open for 4 years. A lot of damage was done inside, and it was assumed that the house was probably going to be torn down, but somebody with deep pockets had preserved it, and now there are lightning rods all over the roof of the house. But it's very distinctive with that water spout that is the dragon. Hard to miss. So I was able to verify all of this, the ghost part, you know. And let's see where we are now.
John Ward's buried in somebody else's grave.
By the way, his wife was pregnant. He had a daughter that was born 6 days before his death. Okay, so John Ward's spirit also told us this. Oh, and so he's buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Atlanta. In that area are buried 3,000 unknown Confederate soldiers. 3,000. 2,000 who are known and died in Atlanta hospitals from their wounds. He talks about a decision, his ghost talks about a decision that he made. And this is one thing I could not verify through my research. Some of his men wanted to desert. They wanted to come back and get back to farming. And by law, he was supposed to execute them for desertion. He didn't want to do that. They were his friends. So he had them in a wooden building, and he was hoping that they would change their mind. So unfortunately, about that time, Union cannons had fired chain shot. You know what that is? And it was whipping around, took down the whole building and killed everybody that was inside. Again, I cannot confirm that. Now, the idea of using chain shot fired from a double-barreled cannon, have you ever heard of that? First came about in the 1600s. The idea is that two barrels are side by side on the same cannon, pointing a few inches apart in different directions, sort of the same direction, sort of. And the fuses have to be lit at exactly the same time.
Tear the cannon apart.
Or the people behind them. And when it's successful, the cannonball is connected with a chain, mow down everything in the path. There were too many things that could go wrong, especially if one fuse didn't stay lit the same as the other one. And although the idea was kind of a good one, no. So the Confederates had abandoned Atlanta on the night of September the 1st. The Union soldiers moved into Atlanta, and then shortly after that, the march to the sea began. Now, the ghost of Captain Ward told us that he remained with his men as a ghost all the way until they got to Selma, where they surrendered in April of 1865. Upon his death, Samuel Cruz, who was also from Huntsville, took over. And his ghost mentioned Samuel Cruz and mentioned several other men that were in under his command. And I was able to verify, yes, that they were the same ones. Wait a minute. Okay, so he said his cousin was with him in Atlanta, and I ask stupid questions when I'm talking to ghosts. I don't talk to ghosts. I don't see ghosts. I talk through a medium, but anyway, I said, did your cousin survive the war? Really, who cares? And he says, dang it, woman, damn near none of us did. So I'm not gonna ask that one anymore. So he said also, like I said earlier, to the medium, you do me justice, but why isn't someone there to represent my wife? His wife, Ellen Tyler Young Ward, is buried at Maple Hill Cemetery, and several of his children. Okay. Now, in the early 1860s, a Union soldier was standing in front of the grave of the Ward children. And it's gonna be hard to explain. Two of their children, they were twins, both died very young. And the headstone was like a box, like this. And it had the outline of the box, and the panels, though, were glass. And on the top of that, there was a statue of two lambs. One had its head on top of the other one. Inside the box was the statue, marble representation of a baby. Somebody broke the glass, took the marble baby, took the lambs on top. So now all that you see is the outline. Now on top is solid, and there is the name of the two children who are buried there. But this Union soldier had described this headstone in a letter to his wife. So that's how we know what it looked like. When all of this destruction took place of the headstone, I don't know. But it was for Leila and Willie, children of the Wards that died in 1859. The question has always been, what happened to that marble baby and the two lambs? Several people are combing through the antique stores trying to find them, think they can find them. So we asked the ghost of John Ward, what happened to those? He says, you'll never find them. He says, someone broke in, as we know, took the marble baby, and when it was discovered that it was missing and everybody was looking for it, they raised it over their head and they threw it on the ground and smashed it into a million pieces. It will never be found. We'll never know who did it. And the same with the two lambs that are on top. Several of the men, the headstones of the men that were with him are all inscribed with Captain Ward's famous Alabama CSA battery, and you can find a lot of those in the Athens cemetery, Captain Ward's battery. And let's see. He was a native of North Carolina. There is a road near Kennesaw Mountain named John Ward Road, and another named Old John Ward Road. And now I've got an epilogue about what happened to everybody. Bishop Polk is often referred to as Leonidas K. Polk. He did not have a middle name or a middle initial, but somebody found a record that had the K, and what it meant was killed. That's and now people think that's his middle name. He was for a while at St. John's Church. Then he was taken to St. Paul's Church, I think is what it's called, in Columbia, and now he is in New Orleans. Private Samuel Watkins surrendered with General Joseph Johnston and others in April of 1865 in North Carolina. They surrendered to General Sherman. Of the 120 men who had enlisted in 1861 and became members of Company H, where am I? There were only 7 who survived. Yeah. 3,200 men who eventually made up the 1st Tennessee, only 65 survived. This book was published first in 1882 and has been republished several times. He died in 1901 in Murray County at the age of 62. And he must have been, those of you who read it, he must have been very well educated. He was just a private, but his writing was superb, and he did not like Braxton Bragg, did he? One of the men who was with Captain Ward was named James Lentz, L-E-N-T-Z. He fell off a train and dislocated his shoulder and could not go on fighting. He died at the Alabama Confederate Soldiers' Home. Have any of you been there? Yeah. There's a cenotaph memorial for him at Lentzville, named for his family. But he's buried at the Confederate Memorial Park at Mountain Creek. The 80-acre home was established in 1902 on land donated by a Confederate officer, Jefferson Faulkner. Over the years, between 650 and 800 aging and indigent veterans, wives, and widows lived there. At first, the widows could not live there, but that was changed in 1915. There were 9 cottages, an admin building, a hospital, and a mess hall. It was designed for 100 people at maximum. And at the peak, though, between 1914 and 1918, there were 123 people living there. The last veteran died in June of 1934, and it was officially closed in October 1939 because there were still widows that were living there. And the last 5 widows were sent to Montgomery to live out their lives there. In 1964, the Confederate Memorial Park was established, and the cemetery holds 313 graves of veterans and widows. And how long do you think we're going to be able to have some money from the state to support that? As you know, that's been in the news a lot in the last few years. Am I right? So, of Ward's battery, and Susie's brother did a lot of research into this, Harold Hutchison, who is, why isn't he here?
I don't know.
Well, I credit him with a lot of the research, and he has found all of the graves, and he does the find a grave, and he's listed, he found all of them. And of those, 74 graves have been identified. In Athens, there are 14. 3 died in prisoner of war camps. Killed in action, 6. Other burials in the county, 17. In Limestone County, there were 5. Huntsville and Madison County has 23, and unknown are 6. Now among those, Dr. Henry Booth Malone, who was born in Alabama, went to medical school, set up his practice in Cincinnati, but came back to Alabama, and enlisted as an assistant surgeon in Captain Ward's light artillery. And in the summer of 1863, he left for 30 days due to illness he acquired while in the military. He died in 1868 from that disease at age 43, which is probably tuberculosis, and buried in the Athens City Cemetery. And many of his family are buried in the Cambridge Church Cemetery in Athens. Private Joseph Street, we have him at Maple Hill Cemetery. He was a police officer, the first officer killed in the line of duty. And that was in 1883 in October. He was killed with an axe. He had gone into a house, he'd heard there was a disturbance. He was going to arrest 2 men, and while he was in the process of arresting one, the other one came out the back, came around with an axe and hit him in the back of the head and killed him. He was also a member of Ward's battery. He was 41 years old. Elliot Robertson Matthews died at age 61. He was the grandfather of Elliot Matthews III, who was a member of your camp. And his grandfather is buried, I believe he's buried at Maple Hill Cemetery, but the grandson, Elliot, that you all knew, is buried here in Athens. Do you have any comments? I hope nobody has questions, because I probably don't know the answer, but do you have comments?
I've got a question. John Ward, did he grow up in Huntsville?
We don't
was he
know.
Born and raised, do we know?
He was born in North Carolina, and he was the mayor from about 1858 to 1860. But from birth to there, don't know.
And I was also going to ask about training. If he was a captain of a artillery battery, what military training did he have to get him to that point?
Don't know. As you know, a lot of those men, if they were able to gather their friends together, that brought them, gave them the right to decide who goes what.
Yeah.
That
Their
and if they
rank.
could pay them.
Yes, sir.
Yes, do you know where in North Carolina he was born?
No idea. And all I could find out, looked on Ancestry.com, and all it said was North Carolina. I've gone through the newspapers, through his ancestry, through a lot of the official records, through a lot of the books like this one, and there's just not a lot about him before his death. But he was very well liked. We could ask his ghost next time we're by there, but anybody else? Comments? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Now, I don't know how serious you are about asking a ghost, or whether you're saying that tongue in cheek, but the Bible warns us not to attempt to contact the dead. And when we think we are speaking to the dead, it is often Satan who is speaking to us.
I know all about that, but what we do is entertainment. When we do the ghost walks, it's just entertainment. And ghost walks are very popular and put my daughter through college, so what can I say? But we've
Thank you,
heard
Miss
that.
Jacque.